Something changed in the waters of the Gulf, and it didn't come with a warning. There were no headlines at first, no official confirmations, just a quiet shift detected not by the public, but by satellites, radar systems, and analysts who spend their lives watching patterns most people never notice. And what they saw that day didn't look routine. It didn't look like a training exercise. It didn't even look like a coincidence. Because moving through one of the most sensitive regions on Earth were vessels that weren't supposed to be there. Chinese warships, not passing through casually, but entering with purpose. And the moment that realization hit Washington, everything changed. Because this wasn't just about ships, it was about timing. To understand why this moment is so dangerous, you have to look beyond the surface. The Gulf isn't just another body of water. It's one of the most strategically critical zones in the world. Every movement here is watched, analysed, and interpreted as a signal. And right now, tensions in the region are already stretched thin. The presence of US forces, ongoing regional instability, and fragile alliances have created an environment where even a small shift can trigger massive consequences. So when Chinese naval assets appeared in this exact moment, this exact location, it raised a question that no one in Washington could ignore. Why now? Because in geopolitics, timing is never random. At first, some tried to downplay it. Routine deployment, freedom of navigation, standard naval presence. But analysts weren't convinced. Because the pattern didn't match typical Chinese behavior in the region. This wasn't just a symbolic move. The positioning suggested something more deliberate, strategic, calculated. And when multiple systems began confirming the same movement, the conversation inside US defense circles shifted from curiosity to concern. Because here's the reality most people don't see. When a new military power enters an already tense zone, it doesn't just add presence, it changes the equation. Now imagine the situation from Washington's perspective. The United States already has a significant military footprint in the Gulf. Aircraft carriers, surveillance systems, rapid response units, all positioned to maintain control and stability. That balance is delicate, carefully maintained. And suddenly, another global power steps into that same space, not as an ally, not as a neutral observer, but as an independent force with its own interests. That's not just a development, that's a disruption. And disruptions in regions like this don't stay contained. What makes this even more intense is the possibility that this move isn't isolated. Because at the same time, tensions involving Iran remain high. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical choke points for global energy, is already under constant scrutiny. Any instability there can send shockwaves across the global economy within hours. Now add a new variable into that already volatile equation, China. A country with massive energy interests in the region, a country that relies heavily on secure oil routes, a country that has been expanding its global military reach quietly but steadily. Suddenly, this isn't just about presence, it's about influence. And influence in a region like the Gulf isn't gained accidentally, it's asserted. As reports continued to circulate, one detail began to stand out more than anything else: the coordination of timing. Because while China's ships were entering the region, US military activity began increasing almost immediately. Not dramatically enough to spark panic, but noticeably enough to signal readiness. Additional surveillance, adjustments in positioning, a subtle but clear shift toward heightened alert. And that reaction alone tells you something critical. This wasn't ignored. It was taken seriously, very seriously. But here's where the situation becomes even more complicated. China hasn't made any aggressive statements. No threats, no declarations, just presence. And that creates a unique kind of tension, one where intentions are unclear. Because without clear messaging, every action becomes open to interpretation. Is this a show of strength, a strategic signal, a defensive move, or something else entirely? And that uncertainty is powerful, because uncertainty forces reaction. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. Over the past decade, China has been expanding its influence far beyond its immediate region. Trade routes, infrastructure investments, strategic partnerships. It's all part of a broader effort to increase global presence. And while much of that expansion has been economic, the military dimension has been quietly growing alongside it. Naval capabilities improving, deployment range increasing, strategic positioning becoming more ambitious. So when Chinese warships appear in the Gulf, it's not just a random event, it's part of a larger trajectory. And that trajectory is what concerns Washington the most. Because this isn't just about today, it's about what this move represents for the future. If China begins establishing a more consistent presence in the Gulf, it could gradually shift the balance of power in one of the world's most critical regions. It could influence how conflicts are managed, how alliances are formed, and how global trade routes are secured. And once that kind of influence is established, it becomes incredibly difficult to reverse. But here's the twist that makes this even more intense. Despite the rising tension, everything is still operating below the threshold of open conflict. No direct confrontations, no escalations that would trigger immediate global response. Just movement, positioning, readiness. It's a silent standoff where each side is aware of the other, but neither is making the first aggressive move. And in many ways, that's more dangerous than open conflict. Because silence creates space, space for miscalculation, space for misunderstanding, space for one small mistake to spiral into something much bigger. And history has shown, time and time again, that it's often not the major decisions that trigger global crises, it's the small ones, the unexpected encounters, the misread signals, the moments where intention and perception don't align. And in a region as sensitive as the Gulf, with multiple powerful actors now present, the margin for error becomes incredibly thin. So now the question isn't just why China entered the Gulf, the real question is what happens next. Does this remain a temporary presence, a calculated signal meant to achieve a specific objective before withdrawing? Or does it mark the beginning of a longer-term shift, where China becomes a more permanent player in the region? And if that happens, how does the United States respond? Does it increase its own presence even further? Does it attempt to counterbalance through alliances? Or does it adapt to a new reality where influence is shared? Because make no mistake, this is a moment of transition, not loud, not dramatic, but significant. Right now, decisions are being made behind closed doors, strategies are being adjusted, scenarios are being considered. And while the public sees only fragments of what's happening, those fragments point to something much larger unfolding beneath the surface. A shift that may not be immediately visible, but will become increasingly clear over time. And that's what makes this moment so important. Because in geopolitics, the biggest changes don't always start with conflict. They start with presence. And once that presence is established, everything else begins to follow. So as Chinese warships move through the Gulf and US forces adjust in response, the world finds itself watching a situation that is still unfolding, still uncertain, still undefined, but undeniably significant. Because what happens next won't just affect one region. It could influence the direction of global power itself.